Hello and welcome to this episode of the Robert Hester Entertainment Podcast. Sort of important for all intents and purposes when you consider a very sad thing happened last week in the city of Pittsburgh and all across the world, in particularly football. Last Wednesday, of course, the day that this podcast is being recorded is on December 27th, 2022. And as you're aware of, we're in the midst of celebrating the 50th anniversary of two significant events that took place. One had the thrill of victory, and the other had the agony of defeat. We felt the agony of defeat last week with the passing of the individual who was a part of the thrill of victory, who put the thrill of victory, and that was, of course, former Pittsburgh Steeler great Franco Harris, who sadly passed away last Wednesday. By last Wednesday, I mean December 21st of 2022, and December 23rd of 2022 was supposed to be a very special day because it marked the 50th anniversary of one of the greatest plays ever made in the history of the National Football League, maybe all professional sports, made right here in Pittsburgh. That would be the Immaculate Reception. Fun fact about that game was that my father, the late Robert Hester Jr., he's called Poochie, was at that game. She surprised my mom. She didn't have any clue of what happened during the game because if you were aware, if you lived in Pittsburgh in the 70s, up until around a couple years ago, when you didn't have to buy a ticket to watch the game, you could just watch it on television or like a billion different channels streaming or live. Back in the 70s, and particularly December 23rd, 1972, you had to buy a ticket in order to watch the game in person. And the Steelers, let me be clear, between 1933, the first year they started in the NFL, first year they played in the NFL, and 1972, up until the Immaculate Reception, they were not a good team, traditionally. And of course, longtime Steeler owner Art Rooney was a part of just being the epitome of putting the love in lovable loser, because he was like that. Because the Steeler teams could win between 1933 and 1971. Of course, the Steelers came together in 72 after 69, the drafting of Chuck Noll, the hiring of Chuck Noll as head coach, and the drafting of Mean Joe Green on defense, and a few other players that were key to the Steelers' success of the 70s. Of course, Jack Ham and Terry Bradshaw, and of course Franco Harris, who was a part of that team, much of the part of the fabric that kept this dominant team of the 70s together, which made them one of the great dynasties, not just in all professional football, but throughout all of sports in general. I also want to be clear that how the Immaculate Reception was made for all of you young youngsters that weren't around in 1972. I wasn't around in 1972. Like I said, my dad was, let alone I wasn't even around when the Steelers were awful. Let me be clear on that. From the 30s to the 70s, up until the time they played at Forbes Field and Pitt Stadium, until they made it to Three Rivers Stadium in 1970. They played in between Pitt Stadium and Forbes Field between 33 and 70. And it wasn't until after they moved to Three Rivers Stadium in 1970 where they became one of the most dominant teams in sports. So I just want to paint a picture on that. Of course, the Immaculate Reception game was brought about. Well, it was the first ever game the Steelers played in Pittsburgh, first ever playoff game. They won their division, the Central Division of the AFC. It was known as the American Football Conference. It was the spinoff to the American Football League. Of course, the Steelers were part of the National Football League since 1933, but a lot of teams were part of the AFL when it was formed in 1960. And 10 years later, they merged with the NFL, the National Football League, in 1970. And we all know what kind of phenomenon was created from there. And of course, the Immaculate Reception came about against an original AFL team, and that was the Oakland Raiders, who played the Steelers at Three River Stadium again on December 23rd, 1972. It was a very competitive game. It was a very defensive game. What you call in baseball pitcher's duel? What was a defensive duel in football terms? But thankfully, up until late in the fourth quarter of the Steelers playing the Oakland Raiders, one of the teams that was from the AFL that the Steelers played, in that playoff game, the Steelers were up 6-0, literally within the last couple of minutes, up until the last couple of minutes of that playoff game, the AFC Divisional, when Oakland quarterback Kenny Stabler had a keeper and went to the sideline to the left side and dove in for a touchdown. It was 7-6, and then the Steelers had the ball. It was like less than 90 seconds left in regulation, and the Steelers, threw 3 times and failed 3 times. Terry Bradshaw threw and failed 3 times on first down, second down, and third down. But it went to fourth down with 22 seconds left, last play of the game, and of course, literally there was no tomorrow. And the fun part, I'm sure you've heard the story about Art Rooney. It was so he saw enough. I mean, he was used to having good times go bad, and just felt the need to just console his players. To prepare for that. I'm sure you've heard of the story of him going into the elevator of Three River Stadium, one of them to get to the locker room. But as he was on the elevator, it was 4th and 10. Steelers had one last chance to try to get a first down, or at least get on the Raiders side of the field. And of course, I'll just cut to the chase. Bradshaw went back. He went to pass. He was in the pocket. Couldn't find anybody. Went to the right side, out of the pocket, and he pump faked and almost got tackled. And then, of course, he threw downfield inside Oakland territory. And there was this story about the ball bounced off of Frenchie Fuqua, and if there was truth to that, the play would have been disallowed. The upcoming play I'm about to tell you was disallowed, but it most likely hit Jack Tatum, who was the Raiders' defensive player. I don't know his exact title. I think it was a defensive back or a quarterback, but he was on defense some at the time. And he hit Frenchie Fuqua so hard that he was more akin to throwing off Frenchie Fuqua than he was, having the ball come towards him. And also the ball Frenchie Fuqua was not the intended receiver, but Bradshaw had to throw the ball anyway. It was circle option 22 or some kind of play like that. Yeah, but, when the ball bounced off of who came up with the ball, you ask? Franco Harris at around the 30-yard line. And, of course, he just jetted down the sideline, beating one tackler and then stiff-arming another tackler and in for a touchdown, and got in for the touchdown, which tied the game. Well, it did not tie the game. It gave the Steelers the lead 12-7, and it didn't take until 50 years later for the video to come out of the extra point attempt that was made after the Immaculate Reception was made. And of course, there was just pandemonium. You saw the video of pandemonium all over the Steelers end zone. Back in the 70s, you could do whatever you please and celebrate with your players. The fans did after the Immaculate Reception was made. But once order was restored, Roy Gerela, the Steelers' place kicker, successfully kicked an extra point attempt, which made the game 13-7. Of course, Oakland had one more chance, to at least get the ball on the Steelers side of the end zone. Stabler went back, When they got the ball, 5 seconds to go in the game, that's when when play stopped after the immaculate reception was made, and he threw to nobody. There was like a couple other Steelers, but one Steeler, I think it was Mike Wagner. One of the Steeler defenders doinked it off, incomplete. Of course, the place went nuts, absolutely nuts afterwards. And the Steelers won that game 13-7 over the Oakland Raiders, now the Las Vegas Raiders, and would lose the following week in the AFC Championship to the only team that still has a perfect record, ended the season with a perfect record in the NFL. That would be the Miami Dolphins, who ironically beat the Steelers this season on my birthday down in Miami. So it was a great thing that happened. And now that we talked about the thrill of victory of late December of 1972, let's talk about the agony, the bitter, bitter agony of defeat that took place almost a week later in 1972. The team that shared Three Rivers Stadium with the Pittsburgh Steelers was the same team that shared Forbes Field, the aforementioned Forbes Field, with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I want to say around between 1933 and like the mid-60s, when the Steelers platooned, if you will, between Forbes Field and Three Rivers Stadium. Of course, Three Rivers Stadium, Pitt Stadium, where the Pitt Panthers football team played, and of course, Forbes Field was the longtime home of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Like the Steelers, like the Pirates in 1970, made the move to Three Rivers Stadium, taking their 3 world championships with them. And this, the Immaculate Reception was made over 12 years after another great moment in baseball history occurred right here in Pittsburgh at Forbes Field, and that was in Game 7 of the 1960 World Series, where Bill Mazeroski, when the Pirates were tied the New York Yankees at 9 in Game 7 of the World Series, hit one over Yogi Berra's head in left center field to give the Pirates their 3rd World Championship in an improbable 7-game World Series triumph, World Championship triumph over the mighty New York Yankees. Of course, 12 years later, and just so happened in 1960, 12 years before, a young and very talented outfielder by the name of Roberto Clemente was a part of that team. And of course, Clemente, 11 years later, after they moved to Three Rivers Stadium, it was his team. And part of the reason he was on that team, he was, so talented. His other Pirates were so talented that they ended up winning their 2nd straight Eastern Division championship in the National League. And then the following year, against the San Francisco Giants, won the National League pennant in 4 games, and then beating the Baltimore Orioles in 7 games to win the 1971 World Series and become world champs for the 4th time. In 72, they weren't as lucky as they were in 71, when another one of sports all-time great teams, the Cincinnati Reds, defeated the Pirates in the 1972 National League Championship Series, and it was in 4 games. And although the Reds didn't win the World Series, they were still one of the most dominant teams in the 70s as well, winning pennants in 75, 74 actually, 3 straight pennants and National League pennants. They did not win the pennant in 74. They won the National League West in 1974. This is how good the Reds were. But they did win the pennants in back-to-back years, 75 and 76, over our 2 teams in Pennsylvania, the Bucks and the Philadelphia Phillies, the defending National League champs right now. And, of course, the Bucks caught up with them in 1979 and swept them en route to their last world title in 79. But getting back to 1972, I spoke too much, but New Year's Eve, 1972, was a very trying time for us. I mean, again, we experienced the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, and the agony of defeat being Roberto Clemente, one of the greatest athletes ever. He was like that generation's Tom Brady. At the height of his career in 72, he hit his last, his hit that would eventually, sadly, be his last hit. It was a 2-run double against Bill Matlack. Excuse me. I can't remember his first name at the time, but I think it was Bill Matlack. But I know his last name was Matlack of the New York Mets, and this was on September 30th, 1972, which Clemente got his 3,000th career hit. Fast forward to 91 days later, he was helping aid so many victims of an earthquake that ironically took place the same day as the Immaculate Reception in Pittsburgh. This earthquake took place in Nicaragua. And he felt so moved. It was as if he was answering God's calling to go down to Nicaragua to help aid all of those earthquake victims, that he did answer God's calling. And sadly, yet graciously, on New Year's Eve 1972, the plane that he was on to get to Nicaragua to help aid those earthquake victims suddenly perished. And it was something in Pittsburgh. The whole city was very devastated. The whole world was devastated at the time. And again, I wasn't around in 72. I was born in 1981 when those events happened in 72. But I was around, as you recall, a couple years ago when Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gianna were in a helicopter outside of LA, and their copter perished. It instantly gave a lot of Pittsburghers, and in particularly Pirate fans, sad flashbacks to if they were around 72 when Roberto Clemente sadly perished. And of course, that was a very awful thing that happened in early 2020. When it happened, January 22nd, 2020, was one of the darkest days in sports. Just like New Year's Eve 1972 was one of the darkest days in sports. In light of what happened, with the Steelers, one of the greatest moments that ever happened in sports took place in Pittsburgh. But it just gives you an opportunity to realize how precious life really is and how precious life should be. When you consider what happened after Kobe Bryant's perishing, literally 2 months later, we were caught in the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic. You really want to look back on your life and just be like, wow, did this really happen? Did I really get along with this person and that person? Just gives you a better appreciation, especially with Franco Harris's passing. Again, life is really precious, and we need to take advantage of every single breath we breathe, because we never know that breath that we breathe will end up being the last breath we'll ever breathe. So take in, savor, and just appreciate, every single breath that you have, because again, you never know if that breath you take is going to be the last breath you'll ever take. And for Franco Harris a week ago, and Roberto Clemente almost 50 years in a week ago, it's just incredible to know that we need to be more of a united people, especially in these times. Again, when I woke up to the Franco Harris story, my heart just literally sunk, and a lot of hearts literally sunk. Whether you're a Steeler fan or a Browns fan, a Ravens fan, or any fan, Bengals fan, any fan of any sport, you feel awful for the families. You feel awful for their friends and their teammates. It's just, and again, I think of my dad. I was 9 when he passed, and he passed in the summer of 91. It's just, again, we just live in these emotional times where it's just sad, just to have life smack you in the face. With Dwayne Haskins early this year and Tunchokin like last year, again, it's just you're literally, and there's a scripture that says in the Bible, God knows the very hairs on your head. And you know what they say about hairs, let alone the strand of hairs on your head, which the Bible says, not only your days are numbered, but that hair on your head may be there today, but gone tomorrow. And it's just, we need to take in every single breath that we have and take advantage of everything that we have in life. Just celebrate it, savor it, enjoy it. As I say those 3 words often when something big happens or something small happens, 3 words being enjoy the moment. And I just hope everybody enjoys every single moment that life has right now, especially in these times where people are dying, Franco being one of them. 50 years ago with Roberto Clemente and Kobe Bryant in 2020, Dwayne Haskins and Tunchokin, my father, they thought that they were going to live forever. But that was not the case. After the experiences that they had, my father passed on from kidney failure in 1991. But again, it's just, God knows when it's time for us to leave. And until we know what it's like to leave this earth, we need to just take advantage of every opportunity we have, every blessing God has on earth for us to enjoy. And speaking of enjoyed, in spite of that sob story or two, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Robert Hester Entertainment Podcast. And please, I encourage you to go out and Mark 16:15, go out into all the world and preach my podcast to every creature. I'm on Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and especially I'm on social media on Facebook and on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Instagram and Twitter at Hestertainment, and I think Robert Hester with 3 eyes on TikTok. So, all right, that's that for this episode of the Robert Hester Entertainment Podcast, paying tribute to the great Franco Harris and the great Roberto Clemente 50 years later. And as for the moment, I'm still here, and I'm still Robert Hester, and I'm still saying I for now, saying bye for now.